The grand hall of the Valdrin Palace stretched high above Jake Harrison's head. Purple banners hung from the ceiling, each one showing the symbol of the royal family. Jake stood in the middle of the hall wearing his best diplomatic suit. It felt strange against his skin after so many months of wearing comfortable clothes back on Earth. Around him, dozens of Valdrin watched with curious eyes. They were tall, much taller than any human. Most of them stood about 8 feet high. Their bodies were covered in hard shells that looked like armor. Each one had 4 arms, and their faces had large mandibles that clicked when they talked. To Jake, they looked powerful and dangerous. To them, he probably looked small and weak. Jake had been on the Valdrin homeworld for 3 weeks now. He came here as part of a diplomatic mission from Earth. His job was simple in theory, but hard in practice. He needed to improve trade relations between humans and the Valdrin Empire. The problem was that the Valdrin did not take humans very seriously. For 300 years, humans had been part of the Galactic Union. It was a peaceful group of 73 different species from 12,000 star systems. Earth was known as a quiet world, good for growing food and mining rare minerals. Humans were seen as friendly and harmless. They were good at talking and making deals, but everyone thought they were physically weak. The Valdrin were different. They were warriors. Their whole culture was built around honor and combat. They had fought countless battles over thousands of years. They respected strength and skill in fighting. When they looked at Jake, they saw neither of those things. A door at the far end of the hall opened. Princess Zarathix entered, and the crowd immediately fell silent. She was impressive even by Valdrin standards. Her shell was a deep purple color with gold markings that showed her royal blood. She moved with the grace of a trained fighter. Her 4 arms were thick with muscle, and she carried herself like someone who had never lost a battle. Jake had heard stories about the princess. She was 28 years old in human terms, though the Valdrin measured age differently. She had won 43 honor duels, which was a lot even for a warrior culture. She had also led 3 successful military campaigns against pirates on the border of Valdrin space. She was a hero to her people. The princess walked up to Jake and looked down at him. Her large eyes studied him carefully. Jake could see confusion in them, maybe even a little bit of disgust. He was used to that reaction by now. The Emperor of Valdrin stood from his throne. He was ancient by any standard, over 300 years old. His shell was darker than the others, almost black, with scars from countless battles. When he spoke, his voice filled the hall. The Emperor explained the situation. There had been problems between Earth and the Valdrin Empire. Nothing serious, just disagreements about trade routes and resource sharing. But these small problems were growing bigger. Some members of both governments thought war might come eventually. That would be bad for everyone. To prevent this, the Earth Coalition had proposed something unusual. They wanted to arrange a marriage between a human and a member of the Valdrin royal family. This would create a bond between the two peoples. It would show that humans and Valdrin could work together, could be family. The Valdrin Council had laughed at first. The idea seemed ridiculous. Their warriors married other warriors, equals who could match them in combat. How could a human ever be equal to a Valdrin? But the Emperor saw something different. He saw an opportunity to show Valdrin generosity. They would accept this weak human into their royal family. They would protect him and guide him. It would prove that the Valdrin were noble and kind, not just strong. Princess Zarathix had been chosen for this honor. The word honor was said with heavy sarcasm by most of the court. Everyone knew this was more like a punishment. The princess was being forced to marry someone she could not respect. Jake Harrison had volunteered for this mission. When Earth needed someone to marry into the Valdrin royal family, he had raised his hand. His superiors had been surprised. Jake was 32 years old and had a good career in the diplomatic service. He could have had an easier assignment, but Jake believed in this mission. He thought that bringing humans and Valdrin closer together was worth any personal sacrifice. The ceremony was quick and formal. There was no love in it, no warmth. The princess spoke her vows in the traditional Valdrin way, her voice flat and emotionless. Jake spoke his vows in both English and the Valdrin language. He had practiced for weeks to get the pronunciation right. A few members of the court nodded in approval at his effort, but most just looked bored. When it was over, Jake was officially the princess's husband. He was now part of the royal family. He would live in the palace and attend court functions. The princess looked at him like he was a strange pet she had been forced to keep. The first few weeks were difficult. Jake had his own quarters in the palace, but they were small compared to the princess's rooms. The other Valdrin in the court treated him with polite contempt. They called him pet names when they thought he could not hear. Some called him the princess's decoration. Others called him the weak link. Jake handled it all with patience and good humor. He smiled at insults. He bowed respectfully to those who mocked him. He continued his diplomatic work, meeting with trade representatives and cultural attachés. He was actually very good at his job. Within a month, he had resolved 2 trade disputes that had been going on for years. He did this by finding solutions that made both sides happy. The princess noticed this. She would never admit it out loud, but she was impressed by how smart Jake was. He could see problems from many angles. He could predict what people would do before they did it. He was good with words, able to convince stubborn people to change their minds. These were valuable skills, even if they were not warrior skills. One evening, the princess decided to test Jake. She invited him to the training grounds. It was where young Valdrin learned to fight, where warriors practiced their skills. The princess wanted to see if Jake had any combat ability at all. Jake arrived wearing simple exercise clothes. He looked even smaller in the vast training area. The princess handed him a practice blade. It was made of wood, not metal, so it would not cause serious injury. Even so, it was heavy. Jake struggled to lift it with both hands. The training session was embarrassing. Jake could barely swing the blade. When the princess attacked, even slowly and carefully, Jake could not defend himself. He was knocked down again and again. His skin bruised easily. After half an hour, he was exhausted and breathing hard. The princess had not even broken a sweat. The princess felt something unexpected. It was pity, maybe even a little bit of respect. Jake kept trying even though he was clearly outmatched. He got up every time he was knocked down. He never complained or asked to stop. There was determination in him, even if there was no skill. After the training, Jake thanked the princess for her time. He said he understood that he could never be a warrior like her, but he appreciated her trying to teach him. Then he went back to his quarters to treat his bruises. The princess stood alone in the training ground. She felt confused. She had married this human as a duty, nothing more. She expected to feel nothing for him, but watching him struggle and persist had touched something in her. Maybe honor was not just about winning fights. Maybe there was honor in trying even when you knew you would lose. Over the next few weeks, the princess and Jake spent more time together. It was required by protocol. They attended state dinners and cultural events as a couple. At first, the princess found these events painful. Other Valdrin would make jokes about her husband. She would have to smile and pretend it did not bother her, but Jake never seemed bothered. He would make jokes about himself before others could. He would laugh along with those who mocked him. This confused the princess. Where was his pride? Where was his anger? Any Valdrin would have challenged someone to a duel for such disrespect. But Jake just smiled and changed the subject. One night after a particularly difficult dinner, the princess asked Jake why he never got angry. They were walking through the palace gardens, a rare moment alone together. Jake thought about the question for a moment. Then he said that anger would not help. The Valdrin thought humans were weak. Getting angry would not change their minds. But showing patience, showing intelligence, showing kindness even to those who were cruel, that might change some minds eventually. The princess did not understand this logic. In her culture, you earned respect by being strong and defeating your enemies, but she was starting to see that humans thought differently. They earned respect in other ways. Then Jake said something that made the princess stop walking. He said that he used to teach history at Earth's military academy. He taught young soldiers about strategy and tactics. He said that understanding war was the best way to prevent it. The princess laughed at this. She did not mean to be cruel, but the idea was funny to her. Earth's military academy? She had seen how weak Jake was with a blade. What kind of military could Earth possibly have? Jake smiled at her laughter, but something flickered in his eyes. It was gone so quickly that the princess thought she might have imagined it. They continued walking, and the subject changed to other things. 2 months had passed since the wedding. Jake had settled into life at the palace, though he still felt like an outsider. The Valdrin court had grown used to his presence, which meant they mostly ignored him. This was actually better than being mocked, so Jake considered it progress. Princess Zarathix had also grown used to having Jake around. She would not call them friends exactly, but they had developed a comfortable routine. They ate breakfast together most mornings. They attended official functions as a pair. Sometimes they even had real conversations, not just diplomatic small talk. The princess had started to notice more strange things about Jake. He woke up very early every morning before the sun rose. She had asked him why once, and he said he liked to exercise. She had followed him one morning, curious. Jake went to an empty courtyard and did stretches and movements that looked like a dance. His body moved in ways that seemed impossible for someone so weak. He was flexible and balanced. After an hour of this, he barely looked tired. The princess had also noticed that Jake ate very little compared to Valdrin warriors. But he never seemed hungry or weak. His body seemed to need less fuel to keep going. This was strange because humans were supposed to be fragile creatures who needed careful looking after. Everything changed on the night of the Emperor's feast. It was a huge celebration marking the anniversary of a great Valdrin military victory from centuries ago. The main hall was filled with the most important warriors and nobles in the Empire. There was music, food, and lots of drinking. Jake and the princess sat at the high table near the Emperor. Jake wore formal robes that the palace had made for him. They were too big, designed for someone with a Valdrin body, but he wore them without complaint. The princess wore her ceremonial armor, polished until it shined like a mirror. Lord Commander Kresh entered the hall late. He was a massive Valdrin, even bigger than most of his kind. He stood almost 9 feet tall, and his forearms were thick with muscle. His shell was covered in battle scars, each one a story of combat and victory. He was known as one of the most dangerous fighters in the Empire. Kresh was also known for his traditional views. He believed that the Valdrin should not deal with weaker species. He thought the Galactic Union made the Valdrin soft. He especially hated the idea of mixing Valdrin blood with other species through marriage. The Lord Commander walked to the high table and bowed to the Emperor. It was a proper bow showing respect, but then he turned to look at the princess and Jake. His eyes were cold and full of contempt. Kresh spoke in a loud voice so everyone could hear. He said that it was a sad day when the royal family lowered itself to marry weaklings. He said that the princess had dishonored her bloodline by accepting a husband who could not defend her. He said that Jake should be sent back to his farm world where he belonged. The hall went silent. This was a serious insult. By Valdrin law and tradition, such words could not be ignored. They demanded an answer through combat. An honor duel. The princess stood up immediately. Her face showed cold anger. She was about to challenge Kresh herself. She had every right to do so. The insult was against her as much as it was against Jake, but before she could speak, Jake stood up too. He placed a gentle hand on her arm, asking her to wait. Then he turned to face Kresh. His voice was quiet but clear. Jake said that he accepted the challenge. He said that the insult was directed at him, so he would answer it himself. He said that 3 days from now he would meet Lord Commander Kresh in the Grand Arena for an honor duel. The silence in the hall became even deeper. Then someone laughed. Then another. Soon half the hall was laughing. The idea of Jake fighting Kresh was ridiculous. It would be murder, not a duel. Everyone had seen Jake try to train with Valdrin weapons. He could barely lift them. Kresh smiled, showing his sharp teeth. He accepted Jake's challenge. He said that 3 days would give Jake time to make peace with whatever gods humans believed in. The Emperor looked troubled. He did not want this duel to happen. If Jake died, it would cause problems with Earth. But by Valdrin law, he could not stop it now. Both parties had agreed to the terms. The princess grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him out of the hall. She dragged him to a private room and closed the door. Then she started yelling at him. What was he thinking? Kresh was one of the deadliest warriors alive. He had killed 37 opponents in honor duels. He would destroy Jake without even trying. Jake listened calmly until she finished. Then he said that he had no choice. If she had challenged Kresh, it would look like she did not trust her husband to defend himself. It would make both of them look weak. This way, at least he was showing courage. The princess said that courage without skill was just suicide. She begged him to let her fight instead. She could beat Kresh. It would be difficult, but she was confident she could win. Jake shook his head. He said the insult was against him personally.
He had to answer it himself.
Then he said something that confused the princess. He said that she should trust him. He knew what he was doing. The princess wanted to trust him, but how could she? She had seen him fight. She knew how weak he was. Trusting him would mean watching him die. The next 3 days were difficult for the princess. She tried to convince Jake to back out of the duel. She tried to get the Emperor to cancel it. She even considered challenging Kresh herself, which would force Jake to step aside. But Jake remained firm. He was going through with this. Jake spent those 3 days in quiet preparation. He did not ask for training with Valdrin weapons. Instead, he meditated. He read books from the palace library about Valdrin combat styles and honor duels. He wrote long messages to people on Earth, though he would not tell the princess who he was writing to. On the morning of the second day, a package arrived for Jake from the human embassy. It was a long, flat case made of dark metal. Jake carried it to his rooms and locked the door. The princess tried to see what was inside, but Jake politely asked for privacy. The princess could not sleep that night. She kept thinking about what would happen in the arena. She imagined Jake, so small and fragile, standing against Kresh. She imagined blood and screaming. She realized with surprise that she did not want Jake to die. Somewhere over the past months, she had started to care about him. Unable to bear the uncertainty anymore, the princess broke into Jake's computer files. She knew it was wrong, but she was desperate. Maybe she would find something that could help. Maybe she would find a weakness in Kresh that Jake could exploit. What she found instead made her blood run cold. Jake's files were heavily encrypted, but the princess was smart and had access to Valdrin military decryption tools. She managed to open one file. It was Jake's military record from Earth. The file said that Jake had served in the Human Expeditionary Forces for 15 years. He held the rank of Special Operations Commander. Most of his mission details were hidden, marked as classified. But the file showed his unit's survival rate in hostile territory. It was 98% across 237 operations. The princess did not understand at first. Earth had never fought a war since joining the Galactic Union. What did humans need Special Operations Forces for? She searched deeper into the files. She found historical records about Earth before they joined the Union. The planet was classified as a Class 7 death world. That was almost the highest danger rating. Earth had higher gravity than most civilized planets. Its atmosphere was toxic to many species. Its weather was violent and unpredictable, and its animal life was incredibly dangerous. Humans had evolved on this death world. They survived by being tougher than they looked. They could run for hours without stopping, chasing prey until it died from exhaustion. They could heal from injuries that would kill most species. They could push through pain and keep fighting when they should be dead. And before joining the Galactic Union, humans had fought wars against each other for thousands of years. They had developed countless ways to kill. They had studied combat like a science. They had created weapons and tactics that were brutally effective. Then they joined the Union and just stopped. They put away their weapons. They became diplomats and farmers. The galaxy assumed this meant they were weak, that they had never been strong to begin with. But what if that was wrong? What if humans were not weak at all? What if they were just choosing to be peaceful? The princess rushed to Jake's rooms. It was the middle of the night, but she did not care. She needed to know the truth. Jake opened the door, unsurprised to see her. He invited her in. The princess demanded to know who he really was. She told him about the files she had found. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled sadly. He said that everything he had told her was true. He was a diplomat. He did want peace between their peoples. But yes, he used to be a soldier. A very good soldier. He explained that humans believed the best way to prevent war was to understand it completely. Their military trained people not just to fight but to think, to solve problems, to find peaceful solutions when possible and effective solutions when not. The princess asked him why he pretended to be weak, why he let the Valdrin mock him, why he struggled with their training weapons. Jake said that he was not pretending. Valdrin weapons were designed for Valdrin bodies. He really was weak with them. But every species had their... The morning of the duel arrived with clear skies. The grand arena was carved from black stone thousands of years ago. It sat in the center of the capital city like a dark crown. 5,000 Valdrin had come to watch the duel. The arena was completely full. Princess Zarathik sat in the royal box next to the emperor. Her sisters were there too, trying to comfort her with words that felt empty. Everyone expected the same outcome. Jake would die today. The only question was how quickly. The betting pools gave Jake terrible odds. Most bets were not about whether he would lose, but about how long he would survive. Some said less than 10 seconds. Others were more generous and said 30 seconds. Nobody bet on Jake winning. It seemed impossible. The princess kept thinking about what Jake had told her the night before. He said he could win. She wanted to believe him, but doubt filled her mind. She had seen Kresh fight many times. He was a machine of destruction, perfect and terrible. A horn blew and the crowd fell silent. The duel master walked to the center of the arena. He was an ancient Valdrin, over 400 years old. His shell was white with age. He had overseen more than 500 honor duels in his long life. The duel master announced the terms in a voice that echoed off the stone walls. This was a formal honor duel. The fight would continue until first blood or surrender. Death was not required, but it was permitted. Both fighters had agreed to these terms. Another horn blew. Lord Commander Kresh entered from the north gate. He wore his full battle armor, polished until it reflected the morning sun like a dark mirror. In his upper right hand, he carried his ancestral warblade. It was massive, almost 6 feet long, with a curved edge that had ended 37 lives in honor duels. Kresh walked to the center of the arena with heavy, confident steps. He raised his warblade in salute to the Emperor. Then he pointed it toward the south gate where Jake would enter. The crowd roared with approval. They loved their champion. The third horn blew. The south gate opened slowly. Jake walked out into the bright sunlight. He wore simple black clothing, not armor. The clothes looked like they were made for exercise or training, not combat. He carried the metal case that had arrived from the human embassy. It was still closed. Jake walked across the arena sand with calm, measured steps. He showed no fear, but he also showed no aggression. His face was peaceful, almost meditative. He looked so small compared to Kresh. The difference in size was shocking. The crowd started laughing. It was not cruel laughter exactly. It was the laughter of people watching something absurd. A few people shouted jokes. Someone yelled that Jake should run while he still could. Another said that maybe Kresh would spare him if he begged nicely. Jake ignored the crowd. He reached the center of the arena and bowed to the duel master. Then he bowed to the Emperor. Finally, he turned to the royal box and bowed to Princess Zarathix. His eyes met hers for a moment. She saw something in them that she could not quite name. Confidence? No, it was deeper than that. It was certainty. Jake set down the metal case and opened it carefully. The crowd went quiet, curious to see what weapon this human had brought. Even Kresh leaned forward slightly to look. Inside the case was a sword. It was nothing like the massive Valdrin war blades. This sword was slim and slightly curved. The blade was dark gray, almost black, with a subtle pattern that looked like flowing water. The handle was wrapped in worn leather that had clearly been used many times. The laughter started again, louder this time. The sword looked like a toy compared to Kresh's war blade. Someone shouted that Jake had brought a butter knife to a real fight. Others made similar jokes. Even some of the nobles in the royal box were smiling. But Princess Zarathix did not laugh. She was watching Jake's hands as he lifted the sword from the case. His grip was perfect, natural. This was not the awkward, struggling grip he used with Valdrin weapons. This was the grip of someone who had held this weapon thousands of times. Jake stood up and held the sword at his side. He took a deep breath, then another. His breathing became slow and steady. His expression emptied of all emotion, and the princess saw for just a moment what her husband used to be. This was not the gentle diplomat who smiled at insults. This was not the patient man who struggled with training. This was someone else entirely. This was a soldier, a warrior, a weapon that walked like a man. The duel master raised his hand high. The crowd fell silent. He looked at both fighters to make sure they were ready. Kresh raised his warblade into an attack position. Jake simply stood there, his sword held loosely at his side, his stance relaxed. The duel master's hand dropped. The duel had begun. Kresh charged immediately. He crossed the distance between them in 3 massive strides. His warblade came down in a strike that would have split Jake in half. The blow was fast and powerful, the attack of a master who had killed many opponents. Jake did not move until the last possible moment. Then he stepped to the side. It was a small movement, economical and precise. Kresh's blade crashed into the sand where Jake had been standing a moment before. As Kresh's momentum carried him forward, Jake's sword moved. It was a single flash of motion, so fast that many in the crowd missed it. The dark blade traced a line across Kresh's upper shoulder, finding a gap between the armor plates. Kresh stumbled past Jake and turned around. He looked confused. Then a thin line of purple blood appeared on his shoulder. It was barely a scratch, shallow and small, but it was first blood. The duel could end right now if Kresh chose to yield. The arena was completely silent. 5,000 Valdrin could not believe what they had just seen. The tiny human had struck first. He had drawn blood from Lord Commander Kresh. It seemed impossible. Jake lowered his sword to a neutral position. He spoke quietly, his voice calm. He offered Kresh the chance to yield with honor. No one would think less of him for losing to a lucky strike. The duel could end now with both of them alive and unhurt. For a moment, Kresh just stared at Jake. His eyes were wide with shock. Then understanding hit him. This was not luck. The human had held back. That first strike could have been deeper, could have been lethal. Jake had chosen to wound, not kill. Kresh's shock turned to rage. He was being offered mercy by a human. The insult was unbearable. He roared, a sound that made the crowd flinch. Then he attacked again, this time with no technique at all, just pure angry violence. His warblade came down again and again. Each strike could have killed. Each blow had enough force to shatter bone, but Jake was never where the blade fell. He moved like water flowing around the attacks. His footwork was precise, never wasting a step. His sword deflected blows rather than blocking them, using Kresh's own force against him. The princess watched from the royal box, her heart's pounding. She understood what she was seeing now. Jake was not fighting the Valdrin way. He was not trying to be stronger than Kresh. He was being smarter, faster, more efficient. Humans had evolved differently than Valdrin. They did not have natural armor or forearms, so they learned to fight in ways that did not require those things. They learned patience and timing. They learned to make every movement count. They learned to turn their opponent's strength into weakness. Kresh was getting tired. His attacks were becoming slower, less precise. He was breathing hard. Meanwhile, Jake barely seemed to be trying. His breathing was still calm and steady. He moved with the same effortless grace he had shown at the start of the fight. Another minute passed. Then another. Kresh had several more small cuts now. None were serious, but each one proved the same point. Jake could kill him any time he wanted to. He was choosing not to. The crowd had gone from laughter to silence to something else. Fear. They were watching a predator toy with prey, and they recognized the dynamic because their own species had once been that predator. Now they were seeing themselves reflected in Kresh, exhausted and bleeding, while a smaller opponent danced around him. Jake spoke again. His voice was not mocking or cruel. It was gentle, almost sad. He offered Kresh another chance to yield. This did not have to continue. Honor had been satisfied. Both of them could walk away. Kresh was beyond reason now. He threw aside his warblade and charged with all four arms extended. He would crush this human with his bare hands. He would show everyone that Valdrin's strength still mattered. Jake sheathed his sword in one smooth motion. Then he met Kresh's charge. What happened next was too fast for most of the crowd to follow. Jake grabbed one of Kresh's arms and used it as a lever. He stepped to the side, twisted his body, and suddenly Kresh was airborne. The massive Valdrin crashed into the sand with enough force to knock the breath from his lungs. Before Kresh could recover, Jake had him pinned. 3 of Kresh's forearms were locked in positions that would break if he moved. Jake's knee was on Kresh's chest, his full weight pressing down. One of Jake's hands was positioned near Kresh's throat, not touching but ready. The position was complete and absolute. Kresh could not move without hurting himself. He could not escape. He was helpless. Jake spoke one more time. He asked if Kresh yielded. His voice was still calm, still gentle. There was no triumph in it. Only tired patience. Kresh lay there for a long moment. His pride was shattered. His body was beaten, but he was still alive, and that was only because Jake had allowed it. Every moment of the fight had been under Jake's control. The news of the duel spread across the Valdrin homeworld within hours. By evening, every citizen knew that the human diplomat had defeated Lord Commander Kresh. By the next morning, the story had reached other worlds in the Valdrin Empire. By the end of the week, it was the talk of the entire Galactic Union. For 300 years, humans had been seen as harmless. They were farmers and traders. They were diplomats who preferred talking to fighting. They were weak creatures who needed protection. Suddenly, all of that was being questioned. Intelligence agencies across the galaxy began investigating. What they discovered troubled them. Earth maintained no standing military in the traditional sense. There were no warships, no armies ready to invade other worlds, but every human colony had extensive civil defense forces. And when investigators looked closer, they found something disturbing. Every human in the diplomatic corps had military training. Not as their main skill, but as background knowledge. It was considered basic education for humans. They learned tactics, strategy, and combat before they learned how to negotiate trade agreements. The galaxy had not noticed this because humans never mentioned it. They never showed it, until Jake, the Galactic Council, called an emergency meeting. They invited Lisa Carter, Earth's ambassador to the council. The meeting was held in private, away from the media and public attention. Ambassador Carter was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and kind eyes. She had been Earth's representative for 10 years. Everyone on the council knew her as friendly and reasonable. Today they looked at her with new suspicion. The chairman of the council, a tall being with blue skin and 3 eyes, asked the question that everyone was thinking. Why had humanity never mentioned their combat capabilities? Why did they let everyone believe they were weak? Ambassador Carter looked confused by the question. She said that nobody had ever asked. Humans had been peaceful members of the Union for 300 years. They had never threatened anyone. They had never started a conflict. The fact that they were capable of violence should not matter if they chose not to use it. The council members looked at each other nervously. This answer was somehow more frightening than any threat would have been. A species that was weak could be understood. Their actions made sense. But a species that was strong and chose to appear weak, that was something else entirely. That required a level of discipline and long-term thinking that most species did not possess. One council member, a warrior species similar to the Valdrin, asked if Earth had more soldiers like Jake Harrison. Ambassador Carter smiled politely and said that Jake was actually fairly average by human military standards. There were many who were better trained and more experienced. This statement was met with shocked silence. Back on the Valdrin homeworld, Princess Zarathix was dealing with her own confusion. After the duel, Jake had returned to their quarters and cleaned his sword. Then he had taken a shower and changed into comfortable clothes. When she found him, he was reading a book in their sitting room drinking tea. He looked exactly like he always did, peaceful and gentle. The princess did not know what to say to him. How could he fight like that and then just sit here reading? How could he switch between being a warrior and being a diplomat so easily? Which one was the real Jake? Jake looked up from his book and smiled at her. He asked if she wanted to talk about what happened. The princess sat down across from him. She had so many questions that she did not know where to start. She asked him why he had hidden his abilities. Jake said that he had not really hidden anything. He had simply not shown off. There was a difference. He was here as a diplomat, not a soldier. His job was to build bridges, not demonstrate combat skills. The princess asked if all humans could fight like he did. Jake said no, not all, but most humans learned some form of self-defense growing up. It was considered basic education, like learning mathematics or history. Earth had been a dangerous place for a long time. Humans developed the skills they needed to survive. She asked why humans chose to be peaceful if they were so good at fighting. This was the question that confused her most. The Valdrin respected strength. They showed their power openly. Why would humans hide theirs? Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. Then he told her a story. He said that thousands of years ago humans fought constant wars against each other. They became very good at killing. They developed weapons that could destroy entire cities. They created tactics that could win battles but cost millions of lives. And then slowly they started to realize that winning wars did not actually solve problems. It just created new problems. The real skill was not in fighting wars but in preventing them. So humans started to focus on diplomacy, on communication, on finding peaceful solutions. They became just as good at making peace as they had been at making war. When Earth joined the Galactic Union, humans saw it as a chance to start fresh. They could be known for their peaceful nature instead of their violent history. They could use their knowledge of war to prevent it, rather than wage it. They chose to be diplomats because they knew the alternative too well. The princess thought about this for a long time. In Valdrin culture, you proved yourself through combat. The strongest warriors were the most respected. But humans seemed to think differently. They believed that the strongest warriors were those who never had to fight. Over the next few weeks, things changed at the palace. The other Veldrins stopped mocking Jake. Some avoided him entirely, unsure how to act around him. Others, surprisingly, showed new respect. Lord Commander Kresh became one of Jake's most vocal supporters. Having experienced human combat firsthand, he understood what others did not. He told anyone who would listen that humans were dangerous precisely because they did not look dangerous. The princess asked Jake to train with her again. This time it was different. She wanted to learn human fighting techniques. She wanted to understand how someone so much smaller could defeat someone so much larger. Jake agreed, but on one condition. She had to understand that what he would teach her was not about conquest or domination. It was about protection and control. Human martial arts were built around philosophy as much as technique. The goal was not to destroy your opponent, but to end conflict with minimal harm. Their training sessions became a daily routine. Jake taught her slowly and carefully. He showed her how to use leverage instead of strength. He taught her about balance and timing. He explained that fighting was not about being the strongest, but about understanding physics and anatomy and psychology. The princess was a fast learner. She had the discipline of a trained warrior and the intelligence of a royal. Within weeks, she could perform basic techniques. Within months, she was genuinely skilled. But more than the physical techniques, she was learning a new way of thinking. Veldrin combat was about overwhelming your opponent with superior force. Human combat was about outthinking your opponent. It was like the difference between a hammer and a scalpel. Both were effective, but they worked in different ways. During one training session, the princess asked Jake about his time as a soldier. What had he done? Where had he served? Jake was reluctant to talk about it at first. Those memories were painful. But eventually, he told her some stories. He had led special operations teams on missions across human space. Sometimes they rescued people from dangerous situations. Sometimes they stopped criminals or pirates. His job was to solve problems that normal military forces could not handle. Problems that required precision and intelligence, not just firepower. He told her about teammates he had lost, good people who had died following his orders. He told her about difficult decisions he had to make, choices that kept him awake at night even years later. He explained that this was why he became a diplomat. He had seen enough violence. He wanted to prevent it instead of cause it. The princess began to understand Jake in a new way. She had thought his gentleness was weakness. Now she realized it was strength. He was gentle because he knew exactly how much damage he could cause. He was patient because he had learned that patience saved lives. He smiled at insults because he had nothing to prove to anyone. This was a kind of honor the Veldrin never taught. It was not about winning fights. It was about choosing not to fight unless absolutely necessary. It was about carrying the weight of your capabilities without letting them define you. One evening after training, they sat together in the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. The princess realized something that surprised her. She had fallen in love with Jake, not because she was supposed to as his wife, but because she genuinely respected and admired him. She told him this. Jake looked surprised, then happy. He said that he had come to love her too. He had not expected to. The marriage was supposed to be political, nothing more. But she had shown him kindness and understanding. She had tried to see past species differences to understand who he really was. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. Their marriage had started as a diplomatic arrangement. Now it was becoming something real. Meanwhile, the Veldrin Council was having private meetings with Earth representatives. They wanted to establish closer military ties, not as subordinates, but as equals. They recognized that humans had knowledge. 6 months passed after the duel. Life at the palace had settled into a new normal. Jake continued his diplomatic work, and his relationship with Princess Zarathix grew stronger each day. They were no longer just married in name. They were true partners. The cultural exchange program was a success. Jake taught classes 3 times a week to groups of young Veldrin warriors. He did not just teach fighting techniques. He taught history, philosophy, and conflict resolution. Many of his students were surprised to learn that the best warriors were often those who never drew their weapons. Relations between Earth and the Veldrin Empire improved dramatically. Trade increased. Cultural exchanges became common. Other species in the Galactic Union watched these developments with interest. Some were hopeful, others were nervous. Humans and Valdrin working together could be a powerful force. Then the crisis came without warning. The Kryn Dominion launched a surprise attack on a Valdrin border outpost. The Kryn were a militaristic species, aggressive and proud. They had long resented the Galactic Union's focus on peaceful cooperation. They believed that military strength was the only thing that mattered. The attack was brutal and swift. The outpost's defenders fought bravely, but were overwhelmed within hours. 2,000 Valdrin died. The Kryn forces occupied the outpost and began fortifying their position. The news reached the capital within a day. The Valdrin Empire responded exactly as expected. The Emperor declared war. The military mobilized. Princess Zarathix was called to command a fleet. This was the kind of situation the Valdrin understood, the kind they had trained for their entire history. War was coming, and it would be terrible. The Kryn were powerful, and they would not surrender easily. Thousands would die on both sides. Other species might take sides. The whole Galactic Union could be torn apart. Jake requested permission to accompany the princess as a diplomatic observer and liaison. She immediately refused. She wanted to keep him safe. War was no place for a diplomat, but Jake was insistent. He reminded her gently that before he was a diplomat, he was a soldier. He had been trained for exactly this kind of crisis. Not just to fight, but to solve problems, to find solutions that military force alone could not achieve. The princess did not want to agree, but she saw the determination in his eyes. She knew that expression now. When Jake looked like that, he would not be moved. She agreed, but made him promise to stay out of direct combat. Jake smiled and promised. He had no intention of fighting if he could avoid it. Fighting was always the last option, not the first. They boarded the flagship of the Valdrin fleet. It was a massive warship called the Vengeance of Honor. The princess's command crew was professional and efficient. They knew their jobs, and they knew their princess. They were ready for battle. As the fleet prepared to depart, Jake spent hours reviewing intelligence reports about the Kryn attack. He studied their tactics, their movements, their communications. The princess watched him work, impressed by his focus and speed. He could process information faster than her best analysts. After several hours, Jake made an observation that surprised everyone. He said that the Kryn attack did not make strategic sense. They had taken the outpost, but they could not hold it. The Valdrin would counterattack with overwhelming force. The Kryn had to know this. So why attack at all? One of the princess's military advisors said that the Kryn were simply aggressive and stupid. They attacked because violence was their nature. Jake shook his head. No species survived long enough to achieve space travel by being stupid. There had to be another reason. Jake reviewed the data again, this time looking for patterns. Then he saw it. The attack was designed to provoke a massive Valdrin response. The Kryn wanted the Valdrin to commit their forces to a border war. They wanted to start something bigger, but why? Who benefited from a war between the Valdrin and the Kryn? Jake suspected there were other parties involved, hidden forces that wanted to destabilize the Galactic Union. If he was right, this was not just a border dispute. This was the beginning of something much worse. Jake requested permission to speak with Earth's Strategic Command. The princess granted it immediately. Within an hour, Jake was in a secure communication room, talking to his former commanders on Earth. He explained his theory. He shared his analysis. Earth's intelligence confirmed his suspicions. They had been tracking unusual communications between several isolationist factions in the Union. These groups wanted to prove that peaceful coexistence was impossible. A war between major powers would support their argument. Jake proposed an alternative to conventional warfare. Instead of attacking the Kryn forces directly, he suggested a three-part plan. First, surgical strikes to disable the Kryn command structure without excessive casualties. Second, rapid humanitarian aid to Kryn civilians to undermine support for their military leaders. Third, a diplomatic offensive to expose whoever was backing this aggression. The plan was risky. It required precision, coordination, and restraint. These were not traditional Valdrin strengths. But Jake believed it could work. More importantly, it could end the crisis with minimal bloodshed. He presented the plan to Princess Zarathix and her command staff. The military officers were skeptical. This was not how wars were fought. You defeated your enemy with superior force. not with clever tricks and kindness. But the princess had learned to trust Jake's judgment. She had seen him do impossible things before. She asked what would happen if the plan failed. Jake said honestly that if it failed, they could revert to total war, but they would have lost nothing by trying. The princess made her decision. She would support Jake's plan, but she needed the emperor's approval. She sent a detailed proposal back to the capital, explaining Jake's strategy and her recommendation. The emperor was doubtful. This plan went against everything the Valdrin believed about warfare. But he remembered the duel. He remembered how Jake had defeated Kresh using methods no Valdrin would have considered. Maybe humans understood something about conflict that the Valdrin had missed. The emperor approved the plan with one condition. If it failed within 1 week, the Valdrin would proceed with full military invasion. Jake had 7 days to prove that his way could work. Jake contacted Earth's Strategic Command again. He requested immediate assistance. Within 48 hours, human special operations teams began arriving at the crisis zone. These were soldiers like Jake had been, experts in precision operations and unconventional warfare. The operation began on the 3rd day. Human teams infiltrated Kryn positions using stealth technology and tactics the aliens had never encountered. They did not kill soldiers. Instead, they disabled communication networks, power systems, and command centers. They made it impossible for the Kryn forces to coordinate. At the same time, Valdrin forces launched precision strikes guided by human intelligence. They targeted only military assets, avoiding civilian areas completely. The strikes were so accurate that collateral damage was almost zero. Meanwhile, human medical teams and engineering corps landed on Kryn-occupied worlds. They began helping civilians, many of whom had no idea their government had launched an unprovoked attack. The humans provided food, medicine, and infrastructure repairs. They showed the Kryn people that they were not enemies. The princess watched from the flagship as Jake's plan unfolded. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. There was no glory in it, no heroic battles, just quiet efficiency and careful planning. Within 4 days, the Kryn military was in chaos. They could not communicate, could not resupply, could not coordinate their defense. On the 5th day, Kryn military leaders began surrendering. They had no choice. Their forces were scattered and confused. But surprisingly, very few had died. The humans had disabled them without destroying them. Jake's team also uncovered evidence of who had backed the Kryn attack. It was a coalition of isolationist factions from several species, including some from within the Valdrin Empire itself. They had supplied the Kryn with weapons and intelligence, hoping to spark a major war. This evidence was presented to the Galactic Council. The conspirators were exposed and arrested. The Kryn government, facing internal collapse and surrounded by Union forces, agreed to a ceasefire and began reform negotiations. The crisis was over in less than a week. No major battles, no massive casualties, no devastation of worlds, just swift, intelligent action followed by immediate rebuilding efforts. The entire Galactic Union was stunned. They had expected a long, bloody war. Instead, they got a textbook example of how to resolve conflict with minimal violence. And everyone knew who was responsible for this miracle. Humans had shown the galaxy something new. They had shown that true strength was not just the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to choose not to. They had proven that the best warriors were those who ended wars before they truly began. Standing on the bridge of her flagship as peace was declared, Princess Zara Thix looked at Jake with new understanding. Her husband was not just a skilled fighter. He was something more rare and valuable. He was a peacemaker who understood war so well that he could prevent it. She asked him how humans learned to think this way. Jake smiled and said it came from experience. Humans had fought so many wars that they finally learned the lesson. Every fight, even a victory, left scars. The real. The fleet returned to the Valdrin homeworld as heroes. Crowds gathered at the spaceport to welcome them home. But the celebration was different from traditional Valdrin victory celebrations. There was joy, yes, but also thoughtfulness. People were beginning to understand that the greatest victories were those that did not require mountains of bodies. The Emperor called for a formal ceremony in the Grand Hall. It was the same hall where Jake and the princess had been married a year ago. So much had changed since then. The nervous human diplomat had become someone the entire empire respected. The reluctant princess had become a true partner and wife. Jake wore formal robes for the ceremony. They fit him properly now, tailored specifically for his human body. The princess wore her ceremonial armor, polished and perfect. They stood before the emperor as he addressed the gathered crowd. The emperor spoke of the crisis that had threatened to tear apart the Galactic Union. He spoke of the traditional Valdrin response, which would have been overwhelming military force. Then he spoke of the alternative that Jake had proposed, a solution that combined strength with wisdom, force with mercy, victory with compassion. The emperor said that humans had taught the Valdrin an important lesson. True strength was not just about the ability to destroy enemies. True strength was about the wisdom to know when destruction was necessary and when there were better solutions. The greatest warriors were not those who won the most battles, but those who prevented battles from happening. The emperor then awarded Jake the highest honor the Valdrin Empire could give. It was called the Star of Wisdom, and it had only been awarded 12 times in the Empire's long history. It was given to those who changed the course of Valdrin civilization through insight and intelligence rather than combat. Jake accepted the honor with a bow. He gave a short speech thanking the emperor and the Valdrin people for their trust. He said that he hoped this was just the beginning. Humans and Valdrin working together could accomplish great things, but more than that, they could teach the rest of the galaxy a better way forward. Jake then made a proposal. He suggested the creation of a joint human-Valdrin peacekeeping force. This force would be trained in both human strategic thinking and Valdrin warrior discipline. It would respond to crises across the Union, not to fight wars but to prevent them. It would combine the best of both cultures. The proposal was met with immediate approval from the Valdrin Council. Within a week, the Galactic Union Council voted unanimously to support the creation of this new peacekeeping force. For the first time, the Union would have a unified approach to preventing conflict rather than just responding to it. Princess Zarathix was offered command of this new force. She accepted, but only on the condition that Jake serve as her chief strategic advisor. Together they would build something new, something that combined military strength with diplomatic wisdom. The months that followed were busy. The peacekeeping force needed to be organized, trained, and equipped. Jake and the princess worked side by side, often for 12 or 14 hours a day, but they did not mind. This was important work. This was building a better future. They recruited from many species, not just humans and Valdrin. The force became truly diverse, bringing together different perspectives and abilities. Jake insisted that everyone, regardless of their species or background, learn both combat skills and diplomatic techniques. A good peacekeeper needed to be ready for anything. Training was rigorous. Human instructors taught tactics, strategy, and precision operations. Valdrin warriors taught honor, discipline, and traditional combat. Diplomats from various species taught negotiation, cultural sensitivity, and conflict resolution. The result was something unique in the galaxy's history. 6 months after the force was established, they received their first real test. A border dispute between two minor species threatened to turn violent. Both sides were mobilizing their militaries. War seemed inevitable. The peacekeeping force deployed immediately. They positioned themselves between the two sides, not as conquerors but as mediators. They offered to facilitate negotiations. They also made it clear that any attack on the other side would have to go through them first. One side tested their resolve. A small military unit tried to cross through the peacekeepers to attack the other side. They expected to be able to push through easily. They were wrong. The peacekeeping force stopped them without firing a single shot. They used non-lethal tactics, coordination, and sheer professionalism. Within minutes, the attacking unit was disarmed and detained. Nobody was seriously hurt, but the message was clear. The peacekeepers were not weak. They simply preferred peaceful solutions. After that demonstration, both sides agreed to negotiate. With the peacekeepers mediating, they found a solution to their dispute within a week. What could have been a bloody war ended with a treaty and cooperation. News of this success spread quickly. Other regions with brewing conflicts requested peacekeeping assistance. The force became busier and busier. More recruits volunteered. More species wanted to contribute. What had started as a joint human-Valdrin project became a truly galactic effort. Jake and Princess Zarathix found themselves at the center of something historic. They were changing how the galaxy thought about conflict resolution. Violence was no longer the default response. Now there were alternatives. Their personal relationship continued to grow stronger. They had learned to work together perfectly, anticipating each other's thoughts and supporting each other's weaknesses. The princess brought warrior discipline and tactical brilliance. Jake brought strategic thinking and diplomatic skill. Together, they were formidable. One evening, after a particularly long day, they sat together in their private quarters. The princess asked Jake if he ever missed his old life on Earth. He thought about it for a moment, then said no. He had found something more important here. He had found purpose, partnership, and love. The princess said that she was grateful for the political marriage that had brought them together. She had been angry about it at first, seeing it as a burden. Now she understood it was a gift. She had gained not just a husband, but a true partner in every sense of the word. They talked about the future. They wanted to continue expanding the peacekeeping force. They wanted to establish more cultural exchange programs. They wanted to teach other species what they had learned about combining strength with wisdom, military capability with peaceful intent. The princess also mentioned something that made Jake smile. She said that eventually they should think about having children. The genetics were complicated since they were different species, but human-Valdrin hybrid offspring were possible with medical assistance. Their children would be living symbols of what could be accomplished through cooperation and understanding. Jake agreed. He said their children would grow up in a better galaxy than the one he had been born into, a galaxy where different species worked together instead of fighting. A galaxy where strength was measured not just by military might but by wisdom, compassion, and the courage to choose peace. Years passed. The peacekeeping force became an essential part of Galactic Union infrastructure. Dozens of conflicts were resolved through their intervention. War became less common. Diplomacy became more respected. The galaxy was changing for the better. Jake and Princess Zarathix became legendary figures. They were invited to speak at academies across the galaxy. They trained new generations of peacekeepers. They advised governments on conflict prevention. They became living examples of what was possible when different peoples worked together. The Valdrin Empire itself changed. They remained warriors at heart, but they broadened their definition of what it meant to be a warrior. True warriors did not just fight. They protected. They built. They created peace through strength and wisdom combined. Humanity's role in the galaxy changed too. They were no longer seen as harmless farmers and diplomats. They were recognized as a species with deep understanding of both war and peace. Other species came to them for advice on strategy, tactics, and conflict resolution. Humans became teachers and guides, but humans remained humble. They did not seek to dominate or control. They simply shared what they had learned through centuries of struggle and growth. They showed other species that the hardest path, the path of peace, was also the most rewarding. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Jake and the princess stood together in the same grand hall where they had first met. They were there to welcome a new class of peacekeepers who had just completed their training. Looking at the diverse group of young beings from dozens of species, they felt profound hope. These young peacekeepers would carry forward the work that Jake and the princess had started. They would prevent conflicts, save lives, and build a better future. They were proof that change was possible, that even ancient warrior cultures could evolve, that peace did not require giving up strength but rather using it wisely. After the ceremony, Jake and the princess walked through the palace gardens. It was evening, and the sky was painted in shades of purple and orange, just like it had been on that night 10 years ago when the princess first realized she loved Jake. The princess thought about everything that had happened since then. She had learned so much. She had grown from a warrior princess who only